I do find the them losing the punk cred very interesting. Because is it going to be like, say, Green Day, where all of a sudden they release Dookie on a major record label, in this case, getting Trump reelected and controlling the House and the Senate, and all of a sudden all their fans that were hanging out at a punk house on Gilman Street watching them play for 30 people just a couple months ago now call them sellouts and see them as mainstream, or people are going to stick with them? I think it'll be a mix, mostly people sticking with them, but as things get more and more horrible over time, hopefully people will wake up. But that is definitely something the right has had for the last 4 years, and it's been easy to play into, with Biden being the top of the chain for the left. Unfortunately, he's an old, doddering man, kind of rambles and seems like, your grandpa towards the end of his life. When you look back at his history of politics, it's very honestly conservative for a Democrat. And, he was a key proponent of the Tough on Crime Act. I think that was him, right? It was his thing. It's real easy to rebel against that. And you've got so many people trying to tell you what you can and can't say. And you can easily develop this image of, well, this is about free speech and you're trying to control too many things, and we are the rebels, we are the people saying, no, we should have more freedoms and this and that, and then they all of a sudden do kind of take on that role for a lot of people. They'll look at the Austin comedy crowd as a perfect example of that. It's these guys who are edgy and funny, and they don't care about your feelings, and they're gonna make these jokes and ha ha ha. But now it's the mainstream. They're emboldened and empowered, and all they're left with is the hate. So do you sign up with the hate? Do you go along with that? Do you start to realize that it was always kind of empty and that's all it was there? Does the left then become the rebels? And they can. We can do that. It just kind of depends on how people actually conduct themselves over this 4 years. Hopefully only 4 years. We'll see.
Well, that's the thing that drives me crazy about it, is that the left is the rebels. The left always are the rebels. And the idea that being left wing is mainstream is just a complete lie. I mean, I know what they're talking about. They're talking about more mainstream liberalism. And there is an argument that has sort of taken over the culture, but it's the same thing that I've been saying about Trumpism and conservative culture now, which is it was just a cultural victory, and most people agreed with it, especially the people in the cities, which is where the biggest numbers, the biggest markets for broadcasts and television were. So, those are the big test markets. That's who they are catering to in large part, or at least, very least, things are marketed there before they're marketed everywhere else. That's one thing I've noticed being out here in LA, is that it's a ton of movie and television marketing all over the place that you don't really see, anywhere else. I've never seen as much entertainment advertising as I see here in LA, which is, it is obviously LA. It's literally movie land, but also it's because the market here is so huge. And so culture kind of emanates out from these cultural, the mainstays, I guess, even though that's not the word I'm looking for. But New York, California, this is where the powerhouses of our culture. And, but being truly left wing, to be truly left wing, to oppose war, to oppose corporatism, to oppose the conglomeration of corporatism into government, which is essentially the same as fascism, to oppose the forcible nature of the way evangelicals and Catholics want to set up the world, the repressive nature of the nuclear family and the expectations that are set upon, people based on their gender, etc. Like that's what our culture is really founded on. So the idea that all of a sudden, leftism is mainstream is just like, it completely lacks cultural context, historical context. And that's the thing about pretty much everything right-wing at this point, is it's all fully lacking context. You don't come to right-wing conclusions about political or social problems by having the full context. The more context you have, the more you come to more egalitarian solutions, in my opinion. And so this idea that conservatism is punk is an idea that can only exist completely devoid of any context for what any of that means. There's no context for what conservatism means, and there's no context for what punk means, because those things are fundamentally opposed to each other. That's what punk is. Punk literally exists to oppose conservatism. You can't just flip that around just because, like, oh, the mainstream media is woke. It's like, that's not how it fucking works, you know? And maybe culturally, in terms of like the zeitgeist, you know, between say the 90s to the 2010s, you know, mainstream culture did move a little bit to the left, but not to the point where you could call it left wing. Like, I would say at most where we were at when, say, like Obama was president, where you had some political controversy, you did have some wars going on that were pretty appalling, but like not to the same extent as Bush. Obama was essentially like managing those same conflicts and trying to wind them down a little bit. But that form of liberalism to me is the center. Obama is the center. And, you know, now things have been dragged so far to the right that what people think of as the center, like Joe Manchin or essentially like Reagan politics, that's center right at best, if not right wing. Economically, it's right wing, but, you know, culturally, there's usually a little bit more wiggle room in terms of, social policies and tolerance and stuff like that. But still, you're talking about, right-leaning stuff for sure. And that's what's the center to America. And that's only going to get worse now that Trump has won again. But I think now that, you know, the conservatives are in power and they're going to try to swiftly enforce their worldview on everybody, I think it's going to be clear that you know, this is obviously the mainstream norm and always has been, even through the Obama years or whatever. It's like conservatism is still culturally dominant because the people who have most power in our society are conservative. And, you know, that's the crazy thing, that the conservatives don't think that. Conservatives think that the richest, most powerful, the elites are all left-wing. And it's like, I don't know. They're either purposely lying when they say that, like in the case of Tucker Carlson, he's just lying when he talks about the elites. But, you know, people who truly believe that are just, they're just delusional. To think that you could be any kind of billionaire and left-wing in any way is like it's just completely detached from reality.
Yeah, that idea of the liberal elite billionaire leftist is pretty much just a fantasy on the part of rich asshole Republicans, I guess. And yeah, the left has always been the rebels. And looking at Obama, I used to think that was a sign. Obama being elected was a sign of the country getting better, getting past where it was, the rock moving forward, you know, slowly but surely getting towards a better, less racist, more open, tolerant country. And to an extent, yes, it was, but nowhere near as much as I thought it was at the time. And I wouldn't have looked at him as the center, but looking back, yeah, that's best case scenario, unfortunately. But all these Republicans do think they're the rebels with that stuff. They think, we're for small government. Democrats want big government. They want to control you, and they want to control every aspect of your life, and they want you to pay all these taxes to support welfare moms and this and that. And it's like, to an extent, I understand the idea, smaller government, better, right? But the way they want to strip it away is all the, ways that just benefit rich people and hurt the working class. It's just the magic trick they've done, and especially Trump. He's pulled this off in a grander scale than anyone else, but of making working class people, especially on the lower end of the working class people, feel like he's their guy and he's representing them, and that they are the underdogs and the rebels. And it's insane that they are able to pull it off, but it reminds me so much of stuff, it's cliche, but like 1984, the George Orwell book, right? Like the was it Doublespeak or whatever, the Ministry of Truth rewrites the history books, the Ministry of Peace starts all the wars or keeps the war machine going. Like the idea that you just tell people the opposite of what it is, and it sticks somehow. If you say something enough times, it becomes true. It's like Trump's whole thing. It's a weird branding thing that I'm amazed works, but totally does. And you see it all the time from them, but in all kinds of things. Every time when I used to deliver pizza, the most rundown, in shambles, poor, trailer park areas would have names like Emerald Springs, Paradise Gardens, and stuff. It's like, whatever it is, just slap the opposite name on it, and it's fine, and people will buy it for whatever reason. I don't know if it's delusion or hope or those are the only two things I could think, man.
Yeah, I think it's a kind of a subconscious effect too. I think that's what Orwell was getting at in that book, is that by invoking such a contradiction, you sort of paralyze the critical thinking of a person's brain. And that may be one of the best explanations of Trump that I've stumbled across, is that subconscious paralysis of your critical thinking that comes from something that your brain should be able to readily recognize as a contradiction, but because it's so blatant and on the face and clearly a lie, clearly it's not true. It's like you're seeing something, you're seeing a rundown slum, but then you're seeing words that invoke Emerald Springs and beautiful tides and whatever. And so that it's the very contradiction that makes you buy the lie. The contradiction is what makes it true to you, or something like that. That at least seemed to be what George Orwell's theory was, to an extent. I feel like that book, 1984, has to be one of the most easily misinterpretable books ever written, because the right wing, the ones who clearly use doublespeak, especially Trump, nobody's more guilty of doublespeak than Trump, probably in all of history. And yet the right still, they think that 1984 is written about their worldview. They're talking about liberal censorship and censorship from the media and stuff like that. They reference 1984 all the time, talking about that stuff. And the more smart of them will reference things like doublespeak and tie that into their worldview. But a lot of them are too dumb to have ever even opened the book, but they still reference it because that's what they think it means. Like the Hunter Biden laptop and the fact that Twitter stopped the spreading of that story because it was hacked materials and that kind of thing. That was the kind of thing that they were saying, this is George Orwell 1986, you know what I mean? And it's as much of a legendary piece of writing as that is, and it is there is probably kind of a right-wing slant to it in a way, even though that meant a completely different thing back then. But, George, this is also the guy who wrote Animal Farm, which was like a very anti-communist book, which, fine, that's what was going on in the world at the time. He wanted to create a metaphor for it. I think it's valid, but it's entirely possible that George Orwell just was a right-leaning guy, and so that is part of what he was talking about. But I think that, he essentially wrote a book that was meant to point out the very flaws in fascist conservative neoliberalism, which is what we see now. And instead it has just been easily appropriated by that same force. And it's like, how much of a failure can your dystopian sci-fi be that it becomes a tool of the very people that you're trying to warn about? Like, that's just a straight up L. Aldous Huxley has fucking George Orwell in a headlock all day. I don't give a fuck.
God damn it. Aldous Huxley having George Orwell in a headlock is going to be an image burned into my brain for a long time now. It is funny that the right uses 1984 all the time. It's not surprising, though. I mean, they always paint themselves as the victim. It's just like right-wing people that were literally shocked that Rage Against the Machine was actually talking about them, or that like the latest season of The Boys is making fun of the left and stuff, or I'm sorry, making fun of the right. It's they always want to take these pieces of media and paint themselves as the hero or the victim or the hero victim, whatever that is. And they see whatever they want to see in it. And I guess that's kind of the point of art. But, a lot of artists have a message, like George Orwell. It's funny, as much as he probably was some version of right-leaning for that era and stuff like that, if you read Animal Farm, it's as much of a criticism on capitalism as it is communism, or I think specifically socialism, really. It's a little on the nose with that at the end when the pigs and the humans become indistinguishable. I was saying, basically these things are the same, or criticizing specific implementations of them is probably more what George Orwell was doing. But trying to look back on that now and give any new insight into those books that are, very basic and very trodden ground is kind of pointless. But I don't think I'll be able to separate that image of Aldous Huxley having him in a headlock, though, from any of either of their works for a little while now. So thank you for that. I do appreciate that. But I love how easily digestible Animal Farm is. I think it's 120 pages or something like that. It's very, very short. It might be even less than that. But it's, I think I was given it in 6th or 7th grade to read. They made a cartoon version of it. It really is baby's first propaganda.
Baby's first propaganda is hilarious. I should reread Animal Farm. I read both of those books, both in school. But for some reason, 1984 stuck a lot more. I remember a lot more from that book. And Animal Farm, I don't as much. I kind of just remember the premise. I didn't remember any of the details that you just mentioned there. And only recently somebody brought it back up to me and mentioned that it was kind of an anti-communist, anti-socialist angle on it. So I'm sure there's a lot to that book that I have lost in time. I didn't pay nearly enough attention in history class when I was in school, high school and shit. That's one thing that I don't know why. A lot of history stuff just straight up did not stick for me. But science, I remember a lot of science lessons. There are some history lessons or English lessons. I was really into English, especially towards the end of high school. I wasn't doing well in school at all, but for the most part, I picked up on a lot of the lessons that we were learning. But for some reason, there's just huge gaps in my history knowledge, and that was the class where we read Animal Farm. And I think most of the historical stuff that I really picked up on was in my English classes. I remember reading Night by Elie Wiesel and different books like that. Definitely books about the Holocaust and other sort of events in that century. 1984, I definitely read it in an English class. But for some reason, we read Animal Farm in a history class. And so that one, it just bored me more. I don't know why. I regret not paying attention to history more because I feel like I'd be more smarter now.
Yeah, it's probably worth a read, or reread, I should say. I just checked my copy off the shelf here, and it looks like the print's a little larger than a normal paperback, and it's like 133 pages. So, I mean, you can read it in a sitting if you get into it, or just casually over a week. But I've read it a couple times in my life, and in my adult life, and I think it holds up. It's worth a read. That's interesting. I would have pegged you for more of a history guy in school. You know, I don't know if it was just how shitty the public schools I went to were, or the era I went to school in, but, you know, I graduated high school in 2002, so it was not the best time for public schools. Not that it's better now, but our history classes I found fascinating, but they, I don't remember them teaching much world history at all. So I didn't get a lot of the references to like Napoleon and stuff like that. I knew who Napoleon was, but I didn't know like a lot of what he had done, or Stalin even. I didn't know much about Stalin other than his association with the Nazi Party in World War II and stuff. I didn't know much about a lot of that stuff. Now, I remember they taught a lot of American history, but it was also like that sanitized fake-ass version. It was a little beyond what I would have learned if I was born a little earlier and stuff. They did have some stuff that was like critical of the Vietnam War, or a little more honest about the brutality against the Native Americans and stuff. But I remember having history teachers that talked about how these books sugarcoat things, and history is written by the victors, and you should research stuff more on your own and stuff. So, you know, good social studies teachers and such. So I got into it a little bit. That was probably what got me into it. And I remember when I was in high school, it was towards the tail end of Bush's first. When was his first term over? Like 2003, 2004, I guess it'd be. It was really easy to become politically inclined in an environment with, you know, 9/11, this hillbilly idiot on TV mispronouncing nuclear, and everything else going on, and getting into punk rock and stuff at the same time. So it was a no-brainer for me at that point. Alex Jones just tweeted a picture of him with a machine gun and said, "I formally accept President Trump's offer to be the new press secretary for his administration." And I don't think that's real. I think he's just joking, but I kind of hope that's real, because that would be maybe the funniest thing that's ever happened. Oh my God. Yeah, I'm sure he's joking, or drunk and insane right now. But if that was, yeah, I mean, Trump's gonna do whatever in this term anyway, right? So he might as well just really fucking lean into it.